The Vatican tried to stop one of these films from being shown. The distributors of another cut 17 minutes, secured an R rating, and then simply put the footage back. And those are only 2 examples. Every film in this video received an X at some point. On top of that, some were banned outright in certain countries, while others were heavily cut or trapped in censorship battles for years. But all that controversy only made people more curious, and all of them eventually became cult classics. I Drink Your Blood was one of the first American films to receive an X rating for violence, which tells you almost everything you need to know about it. The story follows a group of self-proclaimed Satanist hippies who descend on a small town and terrorize a local family. They first attack Pete's older sister, Sylvia. When his grandfather confronts them, they humiliate him, beat him, and send him home barely coherent. That is when Pete decides on revenge. The film seems clearly indebted to Night of the Living Dead. During the climax, the surviving characters even retreat into a basement. But instead of Romero's slow-building dread, I Drink Your Blood turns the idea into rabid grindhouse chaos. The infected grab knives and axes, foam at the mouth, and develop such a fear of water that some of them can be held back with nothing more than a splash. Director David Durston originally wanted to call the film Phobia or Hydrophobia, but distributor Jerry Gross renamed it I Drink Your Blood without telling him, even though nobody in the film actually drinks blood. The MPAA initially gave it an X, but instead of preparing one standard censored version, the producer distributed the original film and asked individual projectionists to cut whatever they believed their local market would not accept. As a result, different audiences saw different versions, while the complete film did not reach home video until 2004. The Devils by Ken Russell horrified more than just the censors. The Vatican publicly condemned the film and, despite admitting that it had some artistic value, tried to stop it from being shown at the Venice Film Festival. Set in plague-ravaged 17th century France, the film follows Father Grandier, a priest whose political independence and unconventional private life have made him powerful enemies. He also becomes the object of Sister Jeanne's obsessive desire. When he rejects her, she accuses him of witchcraft and of causing the demonic possession of the convent. His enemies seize on the allegations. Before the film could be released in Britain, Russell was forced to remove several minutes of footage. Even after all that, the BBFC still gave it an X certificate. Warner then submitted that already censored version in the United States, where it also received an X. To obtain an R, the studio removed another 6 minutes, including more torture, nudity, and plenty of other material. British and American audiences therefore saw different incomplete versions of the same film. The critics were almost as horrified as the censors. Roger Ebert gave it 0 stars, while other reviews called it a grand fiesta for sadists and perverts, and accused Russell of marketing hysteria rather than depicting it. None of this hurt the film much at the box office. The Devils became one of Britain's most popular films of 1972 and earned roughly $11 million in theatrical rentals worldwide. Here is the funny part. By 1972, Herschel Gordon Lewis had spent nearly a decade earning his reputation as the godfather of gore with films like Blood Feast, 2000 Maniacs, and The Wizard of Gore. He had simply never submitted any of them for an official rating. The Gore Girls was the first and only Lewis film submitted to the ratings board, and it immediately received an X. The plot follows a smug private detective and a young newspaper reporter investigating a series of murders connected to a Chicago strip club. Lewis treats the whole thing as an extremely cheap and extremely bloody detective comedy, mixing deliberately absurd humor with some of the most excessive effects of his career. The result is crude and often ridiculous, but subtlety was never exactly the point. It also became Lewis's final film before he abandoned cinema for the much more profitable world of advertising and direct marketing. He would not direct another feature for 30 years, returning with Blood Feast 2 in 2002. 20th Century Fox acquired the American distribution rights to Suspiria, the story of a young ballet student who arrives at a prestigious German dance academy. and discovers that it is secretly run by a coven of witches. But Fox was nervous about releasing the film under its own name. The violence was considered too extreme, so the studio eventually sent it into theaters through a separate company, International Classics. The American prints were also cut by 8 minutes to secure an R rating. In Britain, a censored version still received an X. The hesitation turned out to be unnecessary. Suspiria became Fox's 7th highest grossing release of the year in theatrical rentals and became Dario Argento's highest grossing film in the United States. Argento's work, and perhaps much of the horror genre itself, can sometimes be reduced to beautiful women being killed in elaborate ways. But few filmmakers ever made that formula feel as colorful and exhilarating as he did. And Suspiria is Argento at his absolute best. Originally released as Day of the Woman, the film follows Jennifer Hills, a writer who survives a brutal assault and returns to take revenge on the 4 men responsible. Director Mir Zarki could not find a distributor, so he released the film himself in a handful of rural drive-ins and barely recovered his advertising costs. Then, in 1980, Jerry Gross entered the story. Yes, the same Jerry Gross who had renamed Phobia as I Drink Your Blood without telling its director. His company agreed to distribute Zarki's film on the condition that it could choose a new title. Day of the Woman became I Spit on Your Grave. And the distributors had another trick ready. The original cut was headed for an X, so around 17 minutes were removed to secure an R. Then they simply put the deleted footage back. Naturally, the ratings board eventually took them to court. And that was not the end of it. The film was banned at various times in Ireland, Norway, Iceland, and West Germany. In Britain, its video release became one of the most frequently prosecuted video nasties. The critics were no kinder. Roger Ebert, who I'm going to have to mention again, gave it 0 stars, called it a vile bag of garbage, and later described it as the worst movie of all time. But as you can imagine, the more people tried to ban it, the more others wanted to see it. Phantasm is an immensely creepy and enigmatic cult horror gem that gave the genre one of its strangest villains, the Tall Man, and one of its greatest weapons, the flying silver sphere. At a time when independent horror was becoming harsher and more realistic, Don Coscarelli made something more dreamlike. His film follows a teenage boy who becomes convinced that the local mortician is stealing bodies. What he uncovers involves hooded dwarfs, another dimension, and a world where dreams and reality become almost impossible to separate. That fractured logic was partly accidental. The script was barely linear, changed throughout production, and the actors often worked one scene at a time without seeing a completed version. Several endings were filmed, while extensive editing made the finished film even stranger. The sphere itself came from one of Coscarelli's nightmares. It was also the image that initially earned Phantasm an X rating. The ratings board objected to the famous scene in which the sphere hits a man in the head. Coscarelli eventually convinced them to see the black humor in it, and the film was re-rated R. The Evil Dead is one of the most influential horror movies ever made. It follows Ash, his sister, and 3 friends who visit an isolated cabin, discover an ancient book and a tape recording, and accidentally release something that begins taking them over one by one. Before making the feature, Sam Raimi shot a 30-minute prototype called Within the Woods to show potential investors what he could do. It helped him attract enough funding to expand the idea into the Book of the Dead, later renamed The Evil Dead. The finished film was rejected by several American distributors until Stephen King saw it at Cannes and called it the most ferociously original horror film of 1982. His endorsement helped the film find an audience, but it did nothing to calm the censors. In the United States, New Line expected the film to receive an X and simply released it without a rating. It was later classified NC-17. In Britain, 49 seconds were removed, but the censored version still received an X certificate. Its home video release was then branded a video nasty and effectively banned after the introduction of new video laws. The complete version was not approved for British home video until 2001. None of that stopped it. Made for roughly $375,000, The Evil Dead eventually earned around $29 million worldwide and became the beginning of an entire franchise. Unlike films that ran into trouble over one particularly extreme scene, Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer received an X because the ratings board considered the entire film disturbing. Loosely inspired by serial killer Henry Lee Lucas, the film follows Henry, a quiet drifter who moves in with his former prison acquaintance Otis and Otis's sister Becky. Henry soon introduces Otis to his habit of choosing victims at random, while Becky remains unaware of what the two men are doing. Director John McNaughton never turns Henry into a theatrical movie monster. He is frightening precisely because he seems so ordinary, treating murder as just another part of his daily life. The film premiered in 1986, but its best chance at a theatrical release depended on receiving an R. Instead, the board gave it an X and reportedly told the filmmakers that no amount of cutting would change that. Henry remained trapped without a proper theatrical release until it finally reached American theaters unrated in 1990. And this time, Roger Ebert was on the film's side. He gave it 4 stars and called it a low-budget tour de force. Britain still demanded extensive cuts, particularly to the home invasion sequence. The complete version was not officially approved there until 2003. Along with several other serious adult films, Henry also helped expose the problem with the X rating. By then, the label had become so closely associated with pornography that theaters and advertisers often refused to touch any film carrying it. The controversy helped push the industry to introduce NC-17 as a separate rating for non-pornographic films made strictly for adults.